The mountain man found a huge horse chained to a tree with a note, and what happened next shocked everyone. The snow was falling heavy in the Colorado highlands when a lonely man cut through the timber. He thought he was alone until the sound of chains and the breath of a massive black horse broke the silence. A note on the bridle warned, "Keep him safe. Men will kill to own him." But bringing the animal home was only the beginning. Soon, the most feared ranchers in the territory laid claim to the beast. And then, out of the shadows, a young girl stepped forward, saying the horse belonged to her murdered father, and holding a secret that could change everything. The town would burn. Lives would be threatened. And a man who swore off faith and family would be forced to choose. Surrender the horse or fight for justice he thought he'd lost long ago. Well, standing with the girl cost him his life, or finally give him one worth living. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered valley as Jason Boone adjusted his worn leather gloves. His axe bit deep into another log, the sharp crack echoing through the stillness. 20 years in these mountains had taught him the importance of a good woodpile, especially during the bitter Colorado winters. The creek beside him ran silent beneath its frozen surface, reminding him of the solitude he'd chosen after Sarah passed. He paused mid-swing, drawing a deep breath of crisp mountain air. That's when he heard it, an unfamiliar sound cutting through the winter quiet. A deep snort, followed by the distinctive clinking of metal chains. Jason set his axe down. Carefully, his weathered hand moving instinctively to the rifle slung across his back. Following the sound, he moved through the deep snow with the practiced stealth of an old army scout. The noise grew louder as he approached a stand of towering pines. There, chained to the thickest tree, stood the most magnificent horse Jason had ever seen. The beast was coal-black and massive, easily 18 hands high, with powerful shoulders that marked him as a draft horse. But the animal's ribs showed clearly through his winter coat, telling a story of neglect. "Easy there, big fellow," Jason murmured, noting how the horse's ears pricked forward at his voice. The animal's dark eyes held an intelligence that made Jason's breath catch. Despite its obvious hunger, the horse stood proud, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold air. Moving slowly, Jason approached the tree. A piece of paper, stiff with frost, was tied to the horse's bridle with twine. The handwriting was hurried but clear. "To whoever finds him, keep him safe, for men will kill to own him." Jason studied the note, then tucked it into his coat pocket. "What kind of trouble are you in, friend?" he asked softly. The horse nickered in response, pawing at the snow with one massive hoof. The chain was heavy logging chain, secured with a simple padlock. Jason examined it closely, noting how the links had worn against the tree bark. Using the back of his axe and a solid rock, he managed to break one of the weaker links. The sound echoed through the trees, making the horse start nervously. "Steady now," Jason soothed, reaching up to stroke the animal's broad forehead. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He unwound the chain carefully, noting the raw patches where it had rubbed against the horse's hide. The trek home was slow through the deep snow. Jason led the way, breaking trail, while the great horse followed willingly behind. The sun was already sliding behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in months, Jason found himself talking aloud, his voice rough from disuse. "Reckon you'll need a name," he said, glancing back at his companion. "Something fitting for a horse like you." The animal's powerful presence reminded him of tales from his mother's Bible, of judges and warriors who'd faced impossible odds with nothing but faith to guide them. "Gideon," he decided. "That'll be your name, after the judge who stood against armies with just a handful of faithful men." The horse snorted, As if an approval done at last, Jason's cabin came into view, smoke rising straight from the stone chimney into the darkening sky. He led Gideon to the corral beside the barn, where fresh hay still filled the manger from his morning chores. The horse moved eagerly toward the feed, but not before pressing his massive head against Jason's shoulder in what felt remarkably like gratitude. Inside his cabin, Jason stirred a pot of beans warming on the cook stove. The familiar meal tasted different somehow tonight, as if the simple act of sharing his land with another living creature had changed everything. Through the window, he could see Gideon's dark shape moving in the corral, solid and real against the snow dawn as he prepared for bed. Laying another log on the fire, Jason's mind turned to the mysterious note. What kind of men would chain up such a magnificent animal and abandon him to the winter? More importantly, what kind of men would kill to possess him? Jason settled onto his narrow bunk, pulling the heavy quilts up against the cold. The cabin felt less empty tonight, knowing Gideon stood in the corral outside. His last thoughts before sleep took him were of the horse's intelligent eyes and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together on this winter. Afternoon. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountain valley. Jason stirred beneath his quilts at the familiar sound of hooves pawing at frozen ground. For a moment, he wondered if yesterday's discovery had been a dream. Then he heard Gideon's deep whicker, and a smile crossed his weathered face. The cabin floor was icy beneath his feet as he pulled on his boots. Outside, frost sparkled on every surface, turning the world silver. Gideon stood at the corral fence, his black coat stark against the white landscape. Steam rose from his nostrils in the morning air. "Morning, friend," Jason called, heading to the barn for feed. The horse watched him intently, those intelligent eyes following his every move. As Jason approached with a measure of oats, Gideon lowered his massive head in greeting. While the horse ate, Jason ran careful hands along his flanks. What he found made his jaw tighten. Beneath the thick winter coat, thin scars crisscrossed the hide, unmistakable marks of a whip. Someone had beaten this proud animal, and recently. "Won't happen again," Jason murmured, patting Gideon's neck. The horse needed supplies, proper feed, liniment for his wounds, maybe some medicine. More than that, Jason needed answers about where this magnificent creature had come from. He saddled his old mule, Belle, who regarded the much larger horse with suspicion. The trading post was a good 4 hours' ride through the snow, but the day was clear and the path familiar. Jason packed light, some jerky, his canteen, and the mysterious note still folded in his coat pocket. The journey passed quietly, broken only by the crunch of hooves in snow and the occasional call of a winter bird. Belle plodded steadily forward, while Gideon followed on a lead rope, his powerful strides easily matching the mule's pace. The great horse seemed to enjoy the journey, head held high as he surveyed the winter landscape. By mid-afternoon, the trading post came into view, a collection of log cabins and rough-hewn buildings straddling the frozen wagon road. Smoke rose from stone chimneys, and a few horses stood tied at the hitching rails, steam rising from their backs. As Jason rode in, people stopped to stare. He heard the whispers start immediately, spreading from person to person like wind through dry grass. Gideon's presence drew every eye. Clearly, this was no ordinary workhorse. Jason dismounted near the general store, securing Belle and Gideon to the rail. A small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a respectful distance but watching intently. A man in a threadbare coat muttered to his companion, just loud enough for Jason to hear, "That's one of them Caldwell horses, sure as shooting. Saw him pull their timber wagon last summer." Before Jason could respond, the crowd parted. Two men approached, their expensive fur coats and polished boots marking them as the Caldwell brothers. Jason had heard of them, cattle barons who'd built an empire through means that weren't always honest. The older one, Jed, had cold eyes that reminded Jason of a rattler. His younger brother Amos fingered his gun belt, trying to look menacing. "That's our horse you've got there, Mountain Man," Jed said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Prime Belgian draft. Went missing 2 weeks back. We'll be taking him now." Jason stood his ground, one hand resting on Gideon's neck. The horse remained perfectly still, but Jason could feel the tension in those powerful muscles. "Found him chained to a pine tree up by Crow Creek," he said quietly. "Nearly starved. Had a note saying to keep him safe." Amos took a step forward, his face flushing red. "You calling us liars, old man?" "Not calling anyone anything," Jason replied evenly. "Just telling you how I found him." "Found him." Yet's smile never reached his eyes. "Listen careful, friend. That horse is Caldwell property. You'd best remember who controls the water rights in this valley, who decides which cattle get to graze where." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "Would be a shame if you found yourself cut off come spring." The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably. Jason saw several faces he recognized. Martin the blacksmith, Sarah Wheeler, who ran the store, old Tom who carried mail up the mountain. Some met his eyes with sympathy, others looked away. The Caldwell's power cast a long shadow in these parts. "Man ought to have proof when he claims property," Jason said, his voice carrying clearly in the winter air. "Especially property that shows whip marks." A murmur ran through the onlookers. Yet's face hardened, while Amos's hand crept closer to his pistol. The older Caldwell stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You'll regret meddling in Caldwell business, Mountain Man. That's a promise." The ride back to his cabin felt longer than usual. Jason's mind churned with the morning's confrontation as Belle picked her careful way through the snow. Behind them, Gideon's powerful strides remained steady, his breath visible in the cold mountain air that evening. As Jason forked fresh hay into the corral, memories of his late wife Sarah drifted back like autumn leaves. She had been Cherokee, wise in the ways of both her people and the settlers. "Truth stands firm," she used to say, "like the mountains themselves. Men who fight against it only wear themselves down, like water on stone." Jason smiled sadly, remembering how she would say it in both Cherokee and English, teaching him her language along with her wisdom. The familiar ache of loss squeezed his chest, but tonight it came with something else. Resolve. The next morning dawned gray and threatening snow. Jason needed supplies. Flour and lamp oil wouldn't wait for better weather. He left Gideon, well fed, in the corral and rode Belle back toward town, alert for trouble. The trading post was quiet when he arrived. Only a few wagons pulled up to the hitching rails. Jason tied Belle near the store's front door, positioning her so he could keep watch through the window. While he shopped, he was measuring out flour when movement caught his eye. A young girl stood outside, staring at Belle as if seeing a ghost. She was thin, wearing a worn coat several sizes too large, her dark hair in 2 long braids. Her features showed both Cherokee and settler heritage, but it was her eyes that caught Jason's attention. They held a weight beyond her years. The girl's gaze darted between Jason and his mule, clearly searching for something. When she turned away, disappointment evident in the slump of her shoulders, Jason found himself speaking. "Looking for someone, child?" She startled, then drew herself up straight. "No, sir." "I thought." She paused, gathering courage. "Yesterday, folks said a mountain man brought in a big black horse. Like one I used to know. Gideon," Jason said quietly. "Had to leave him home today." The girl's eyes went wide. Tears welled up but didn't fall. "You named him Gideon?" Her voice trembled. "My father called him Thunderchild in Cherokee because of how his hooves shook the ground when he ran." Jason set down his flour sack, giving the girl his full attention. "What's your name?" "Curran Two Feathers," she replied. "My father was James Two Feathers. He bred horses in the valley before. Her voice caught. Before what, Karen? She straightened her spine, chin lifting. Before the Caldwells killed him. They said he cheated them in a deal, but that's a lie. They wanted his breeding stock and his valley pasture. When he wouldn't sell, she stopped, fighting for control. Take your time, Jason said, gently. Karen reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper, carefully smoothing it open. The charcoal drawing showed a gangly-legged colt, but the distinctive broad head and powerful chest were unmistakable. I drew this when Thunderchild was young. See the white star on his nose? The way his left ear turns in just a little? Jason nodded. Every detail matched. The Caldwells took everything after Father died. The horses, the land deed, everything. Said they had papers proving Father owed them money, but those papers were lies. Karen's voice grew stronger. I've been living with my mother's cousin since then, but I never stopped looking for proof. She met Jason's eyes directly. Please, sir, that horse is all that's left of my father's dream. The Caldwells will try to take him from you, just like they took everything from us. But if you'll help me, maybe we can prove the truth. Maybe we can make things right. Jason studied the young girl before him. He saw grief in her eyes, yes, but something else too. The same quiet strength his Sarah had possessed. The same unwavering faith in truth. Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting past the windows. The smart thing would be to walk away. The Caldwells had money, guns, and influence. Standing against them meant risking everything he'd built in his mountain sanctuary. But Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, truth stands firm. I reckon, Jason said slowly, your father's horse might like to see you again. He held out his hand. Name's Jason Boone. Seems we've got some work ahead of us. Karen's smile broke through like sunlight after storm clouds. She took his offered hand, her small fingers gripping with surprising strength. Thank you, Mr. Boone. I won't let you down. Just Jason, he said. Now, let's get this flour loaded up. Got a horse waiting at home who'll want to meet you proper. Jason's mule Belle plodded steadily through the deepening snow, with Karen perched behind him on the saddle. He'd wrapped her in his spare blanket after noticing her threadbare coat. To any neighbors they passed, he simply explained she was kin to the horse's rightful owner. True enough, though carefully worded. The sun hung low by the time they reached his cabin, painting the snow-laden pines in amber light. Karen's eyes lit up at the sight of Gideon in the corral, his black coat stark against the white landscape. The massive horse lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he caught their scent. Thunderchild, Karen whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He remembers me. Jason helped her down from Belle, noting how light she felt, too thin for a growing girl. While he tended to the animals, Karen approached the corral slowly, speaking soft words in Cherokee. Gideon stretched his great neck over the rails, allowing her small hand to stroke his frost-dusted forelock. Inside the cabin, Jason stirred up the banked fire and set about making supper. It wasn't much: beans, cornbread, and the last of his dried venison, but Karen insisted on helping, moving about his small kitchen as if desperate to be useful. When Jason set the tin plates on his rough-hewn table, Karen remained standing, hands clasped. "May I say grace?" she asked quietly. Jason couldn't remember the last time he'd prayed before a meal. Since Sarah died, he turned away from such practices. But something in Karen's earnest expression made him nod. "Dear Lord," she began, her young voice steady and clear. "Thank you for this food, and for bringing me to Thunderchild. Thank you for Mr. Jason's kindness. Please help us find justice for my father, and give us wisdom to know your path. Amen." The simple prayer struck Jason like a physical blow. How many times had Sarah sat at this very table, Bible open beside her plate, reading passages aloud in both English and Cherokee. He'd forgotten how much he missed the sound of scripture in his home. They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling and snow tapping against the window panes. After helping wash the dishes, Karen retrieved her worn leather satchel from beside the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew a book wrapped carefully in oilcloth. "This was my father's," she said, unwrapping the Bible reverently. Its leather cover was smooth with age and use, the pages well thumbed. "I've carried it ever since they killed him. It was all I could save." Jason watched as she opened it with careful fingers. Between the pages, she withdrew a folded document, the paper yellowed but intact. "These are Thunderchild's breeding papers," she explained, smoothing them on the table. "Father was so proud of his bloodline. But there's something else." She pointed to a note scrawled in the margin. "Deed to Valley Pasture and Strong Box. Mapped location in Psalms 23. The Valley Pasture," Karen continued, her voice growing urgent. "That's what they really wanted. Father found this hidden valley, perfect for raising horses. He filed a legal claim, but the Caldwells," she swallowed hard, "they said he never had a deed, that he was squatting on their land. But Father told me he hid the proof where they'd never find it." Jason studied the breeding papers, noting the official stamps and signatures. "These prove Gideon, Thunderchild, was your father's horse," he said slowly. "But without the deed itself, and without witnesses willing to speak against the Caldwells." "I know," Karen interrupted, lifting her chin. "The townspeople are afraid. The Caldwells have money and guns. But Father always said justice belongs to the patient." Her small hand rested on the Bible. "He taught me to trust in God's timing, not man's." Jason felt something stir in his chest. Respect for this young girl's courage, mixed with an uncomfortable awareness of his own recent faithlessness. She had lost everything yet kept her father's teachings close. Meanwhile, he'd hidden in these mountains, nursing his grief like a wound that wouldn't heal. "Your father sounds like a wise man," he said finally. "He was." Karen's voice was soft but certain. "And he deserves to have his name cleared. The truth needs to be told, Mr. Jason, even if it takes time, even if it's dangerous." Jason nodded slowly, remembering Sarah's similar quiet strength. "We'll need to be careful," he warned. "The Caldwells won't give up their power easily." "I know," Karen said, carefully wrapping the Bible again. "But I'm not afraid. Not anymore." She looked up at him, her young face solemn in the firelight. "God brought me to you and Thunderchild. That's not chance. That's providence." The storm hit just after midnight, howling around the cabin's eaves like a hungry wolf. Jason stoked the fire and added an extra blanket to Karen's borrowed bed, his wife's old quilt, unused these past 3 years. Through the night, snow piled deep against the door, and by morning, the world had turned white and silent. "Looks like we're staying put for a spell," Jason said, shouldering through the drifts to reach the barn. Karen followed in his tracks, eager to help with morning chores. Together, they fed Gideon and Belle, the girl's small hands working quick and sure with the hay. Over the next 2 days, they fell into an easy rhythm. Jason showed Karen how to split kindling, demonstrating the proper angle to hold the hatchet. She learned quickly, her face bright with accomplishment at each clean strike. "My father taught me many things," Karen said, carefully stacking the wood she'd split. "But never this. He said working with horses was enough." Jason nodded, checking his trapline through the deep snow. Karen walked beside him, learning to spot the signs of rabbit and fox. "Your father sounds like he was a good teacher." He was. Karen's eyes grew distant. He believed kindness worked better than force, especially with horses. She reached down to examine a trap, copying Jason's careful movements. He never used a whip on Thunderchild, just spoke to him, quiet and steady, like he was having a conversation. Back at the corral, Karen demonstrated her father's methods. She approached Gideon with soft Cherokee words, her hand extended palm up. The great horse lowered his head to her touch. "See?" she explained to Jason. "Father said horses remember kindness longer than fear." She stroked Gideon's nose. "That's why the Caldwells could never truly own him, even with their whips and chains." Jason watched them together, seeing how the horse gentled under her care. While Karen worked with Gideon, Jason taught her the mentak, showing her how to oil the leather and repair worn spots. They shared the work easily, like family. When the snow finally eased on the third morning, Jason knew they couldn't delay any longer. They needed to take Karen's evidence to town. He helped her wrap the Bible carefully and stowed it in his saddlebag. The journey took nearly 6 hours, their mounts trudging through deep snow. As they rode, Karen asked about the silver band Jason wore on a leather cord around his neck. "It was Sarah's," he said quietly. "My wife's. She was Cherokee, like your mother." Karen nodded solemnly. "How long has she been gone?" 3 years this spring. Fever took her. Jason touched the ring briefly. "Some days the missing feels fresh as yesterday." "I know," Karen said softly. "Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear mother singing or father laughing. Then I remember." They rode in understanding silence for a while, sharing the comfort of those who knew deep loss. Finally, Karen spoke again. "But they're not really gone, are they? Not if we remember their love." Jason felt something tight in his chest ease slightly. "No," he agreed. "Not really gone at all." The town appeared ahead, smoke rising straight from chimneys in the still air. Jason led them directly to the white-painted church where Reverend Markham kept his study. The preacher was known for his fairness, often standing alone against the powerful to defend the weak. They found him organizing his sermon notes, his desk cluttered with papers and books. The Reverend listened intently as Karen shared her story, his kind face growing grave at the mention of her father's murder. "The Caldwell's influence runs deep," Markham said, examining the breeding papers. "May here owe them money or favors, but truth and justice must prevail." He studied Karen's determined face. "Your father was a good man, child. I remember him well." The Reverend crossed to a heavy iron strongbox built into the church wall. "We'll keep your father's Bible and these papers safe here," he said, turning the key in the lock. "No one will dare break into God's house to steal them." He turned back to Karen and Jason, his expression firm but encouraging. "I'll help you present this evidence to the townspeople. It won't be easy. The Caldwells won't surrender their power quietly, but I've watched them bully and cheat good people for too long." He placed a gentle hand on Karen's shoulder. "The Lord sees all, child. Justice may seem slow, but it cannot be stopped forever." "Thank you, Reverend," Karen said quietly. "Yes, much obliged," Jason added, touching his hat. "Brim, no thanks needed," Markham replied. "It's time someone stood against their wickedness. We'll face whatever comes together." The church bell rang clear across the snow-hushed valley that Sunday morning. Jason adjusted his worn collar, feeling strange in his best shirt after so many years away from services. He helped Karen down from her horse, noting how she braided her hair neat and proper for church. Inside, lamplight warmed the wooden pews and cast soft shadows on whitewashed walls. Karen kept one hand wrapped tight around a piece of Gideon's bridle, leather her father had worked with his own hands. She held her head high, though Jason could see her fingers trembling. "Been a spell since I sat in a proper church," Jason whispered as they found seats near the back. The wooden pew felt hard and unfamiliar beneath him. "Mother always said God hears us anywhere," Karen whispered back. "But sometimes it helps to gather with others who seek truth." The congregation filled slowly, ranchers in press shirts, townswomen in modest dresses, children fidgeting in their Sunday best. A few curious glances came their way, but most kept their eyes forward as Reverend Markham stepped to the pulpit. "Let us begin with Amazing Grace," the preacher announced. The familiar hymn rose up, voices joining verse by verse. Jason remained silent, but Karen sang clear and sweet beside him, her young voice carrying the ancient words of hope. After several hymns, Reverend Markham opened his Bible. His sermon drew from Proverbs, speaking of honest weights and measures, of greed that corrupts the soul. "Truth may be buried," he said, his steady gaze sweeping the congregation, "but like a seed in spring, it will always rise to light." Jason felt Karen straighten beside him as the preacher continued. "Today we had neighbors among us with truth to share." He gestured toward their pew. "Jason Boone and Karen Two Feathers, please come forward." They walked slowly to the front, their boots echoing on wooden floorboards. Karen clutched the bridle piece like a talisman. Jason could feel dozens of eyes following their every move. "Tell us, Brother Boone," Reverend Markham said kindly, "how you came to find the horse called Gideon." Jason cleared his throat, unused to speaking before crowds. But he told the story plain and true, finding the massive black horse chained in the frozen woods. The mysterious note, the signs of mistreatment. Karen then stepped forward, her voice small but steady as she shared her father's story. She held up the breeding papers, pointing out dates and signatures that proved Gideon's lineage and rightful ownership. Murmurs rippled through the church. Jason saw Mrs. Miller, the baker's wife, nodding firmly. Old Tom Jenkins stroked his beard thoughtfully, but others shifted uneasily, darting glances toward the door. Before Reverend Markham could speak again, that door burst open with a bang. The Caldwell brothers strode in, their spurs ringing against the floorboards. Both wore gumbelts, a clear thread in the house of God. "Quite a fairy tale you're spinning, girl," Jed Caldwell sneered, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Shame to disturb good folks' Sunday with such lies." "That horse is Caldwell property," Amos added, his hand resting too casual on his holster. "Always has been." "The breeding papers say different," Karen said, her chin lifting despite her fear. "Papers can't be forged," Jed spat. "Just like stories can be invented by thieving half-breeds and mountain hermits." A gasp went through the congregation at his cruel words. Reverend Markham stepped forward, his face stern. "This is God's house, Mr. Caldwell. Such language has no place here." The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Jason moved closer to Karen, ready to shield her if needed. But before anyone could speak again, heavy boots sounded on the church steps. Marshal Cooper appeared in the doorway, his badge catching the lamplight. Though his hair had gone gray and his face was lined with age, authority still rang in his voice. "Seems we have ourselves a proper dispute here." "No dispute, Marshal," Jed said smoothly. "Just trespassers trying to steal what's ours." "That so?" The Marshal's weathered face gave nothing away. "Well now, serious claims have been made on both sides. Reckon this needs proper investigation. Statements taken, papers examined, witnesses questioned." He looked steadily at the Caldwell brothers. "Unless you object to letting the law sort it out fair and square?" Yet's jaw clenched, but he could hardly refuse with the whole congregation watching. "Investigate all you want, Marshal. Won't change what's true." He jerked his head at his brother, and they stalked out, their boots heavy on the steps. A collective breath seemed to release through the church. Karen's shoulders sagged slightly as tension drained away. Jason steadied her with a gentle hand. "The truth will stand," Reverend Markham said firmly to the congregation. "Let us pray for justice to prevail." As heads bowed for the closing prayer, Jason saw real hope shine in Karen's eyes for the first time. The truth had been spoken aloud at last. Whether whispered or shouted, truth had a power all its own, like water wearing away stone, it could not be stopped forever. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in soft rose and gold. Jason rose from his bed, bones creaking as he pulled on his worn boots. The cabin floor felt cold beneath his feet as he made his way to the door, pausing to stoke the dying embers in the fireplace outside. Gideon's massive form cast a long shadow in the early morning light. The horse nickered softly as Jason approached with a measure of oats. "Morning to you too, big fella," he murmured, reaching up to pat the horse's broad neck. Inside the cabin, Karen already stood at the cook stove, stirring a pot of bubbling porridge. The spoon moved in slow circles as she hummed one of her mother's Cherokee songs under her breath. The familiar tune reminded Jason of his own wife, bringing a bittersweet ache to his chest. "Reckon we should see Marshall Cooper today," Jason said, settling at the rough-hewn table. "Get your story written down proper." Karen nodded, spooning the hot porridge into 2 wooden bowls. "Do you think he'll believe us?" "Cooper's a fair man," Jason replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Might be scared of the Caldwells like everyone else, but he'll do right if we give him solid proof." They finished their breakfast in companionable silence, then saddled their horses for the ride to town. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they followed the wagon track through stands of snow-laden pine. Marshall Cooper's office sat at the end of the main street, a weathered building with a tin star nailed above the door. Inside, the old lawman listened carefully as Karen shared her story, his pen scratching across paper as she spoke of her father's murder and the stolen horse. "It's a serious charge," Cooper said finally, setting down his pen. "The Caldwells hold powerful sway here." He rubbed his graying mustache. "But if that Bible and those papers are genuine, they're in Reverend Markham's strongbox," Jason said. "We can show you right now." They stepped out onto the street, boots crunching in the packed snow. They hadn't gone 20 paces when a shout split the morning quiet. "Fire! The church is burning!" Black smoke billowed against the winter sky, curling up from the church's wooden roof like dark fingers. People poured from shops and houses, forming a bucket line from the town well to the church doors. But the flames spread too quickly, consuming the dry timber like hungry wolves. Reverend Markham stumbled out through the smoke, coughing violently. His face was streaked with soot as Jason caught him before he fell. Someone broke in. The preacher gasped. "The strongbox. It's gone." Jason's heart sank like a stone. He looked at Karen and saw the same horrified realization in her eyes. The Caldwells had destroyed their only proof. The bucket line worked desperately, but it was no use. The church blazed like a torch against the morning sky, its wooden bones crackling and groaning as they surrendered to the flames. Karen watched the destruction with tears streaming down her face, her small frame shaking with sobs. "All Papa's papers," she whispered. "Everything we had." When her knees buckled, Jason caught her, lifting her easily in his arms, like he might have carried his own daughter. He held her close as she wept into his coat, her tears hot against the frozen air. "You're not alone," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "We'll find another way." Marshall Cooper stood nearby, his lined face grim as he watched the church burn. The old lawman's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, but they all knew proving who set the fire would be as impossible as recovering the lost documents. As the flames began to die, leaving only smoking ruins against the snow, Jason carried Karen to where their horses waited. The ride back to the cabin was silent, except for the crunch of hooves in snow and Karen's occasional hitching breaths. Evening settled over the valley by the time they reached home. In the corral, Gideon pressed, his great head against Karen's shoulder, as if trying to comfort her. The horse's warm breath steamed in the cold air as Karen buried her face in his coal-black mane. Jason watched them from the cabin door, his heart heavy but his jaw set with determination. The Caldwells might have burned their proof, but they couldn't burn away the truth. As long as Gideon stood as living testimony and Karen kept her father's memory alive, hope wasn't truly lost, just harder to hold on to. Inside the cabin, shadows deepened as night drew its curtain across the sky. The fire's glow caught the tears still falling silently down Karen's cheeks as she curled in Jason's old rocking chair. Outside, Gideon's solid presence kept vigil, his massive form a darker shadow against the gathering dark. 2 days crept by. At the cabin like molasses in winter, Jason kept his Winchester rifle close, moving between windows with practiced stealth. Every snapped twig or distant crow call made him tense. The Caldwells weren't meant to leave matters unfinished. Karen paced the cabin floor like a caged fox, her footsteps wearing a path in the rough planks. "We can't just hide here," she said on the second evening, her voice tight with frustration. "Papa's note mentioned that deed. It has to be somewhere in that valley." Jason lowered his rifle and studied her determined face in the lamplight. "Even if we find it, the Caldwells burned all our other proof. But the deed would be official, with the territory seal," Karen insisted. "They couldn't burn that away." She pulled out her father's Bible again, carefully turning its worn pages. "There must be something else here, something we missed." Jason set his rifle aside and joined her at the table. Together they examined every page, every margin. Near the back, Karen's fingers stopped on a faint pencil mark. What looked like random scratches slowly took shape, a crude map showing a distinctive ridge of pines, a waterfall, and what might be valley walls. "Papa drew this," Karen whispered, touching the marks reverently. "I remember him sketching in his Bible some nights. He must have known." Jason studied the landmarks. "Reckon I know that ridge. 3 days' ride west, maybe less in good weather." Karen's eyes lit with hope for the first time since the church fire. "We have to try." By dawn, they had supplies packed: jerk meat, hard biscuits, coffee, and extra blankets. Jason saddled his steady mule while Karen prepared Gideon. The great horse seemed to sense their purpose, standing perfectly still as she tightened his girth strap. They set out as morning fog lifted from the valley. Snow lay deep on the ridges, making progress slow. Jason led the way, checking landmarks against the Bible sketch. Karen rode Gideon with natural grace, the horse's powerful strides eating up distance despite the difficult terrain. Near sunset, they made camp beside a frozen stream. Jason built a small fire while Karen spread their bedrolls under a snow-laden pine. The flames cast dancing shadows as they shared a simple meal of biscuits and jerky. "My father used to sing when we made camp," Karen said softly, watching the fire. "He said music helps horses feel safe in strange places." She began humming quietly, then singing words in Cherokee that flowed like water over stones. Jason closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. It had been so long since he'd heard music of any kind. The tune spoke of stars and horses, of peace found in wild places. He felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "Would you teach me?" he asked when she finished. Karen smiled, surprised, but pleased. Together they sat by the fire as she helped him shape the unfamiliar words. His rough voice stumbled at first, but soon found the rhythm. Above them, stars pierced the dark like ice crystals, witnessing their unlikely duet. They rose. Before dawn, pushing on through deepening snow. By midday, Jason recognized the pine ridge from the sketch. "There," he pointed. "Valley should lie just beyond." They crested the ridge as afternoon sun broke through clouds. Below them stretched a hidden valley, sheltered by steep walls. Even in winter, patches of rich grass showed through snow. A half-frozen stream tumbled down one wall in the exact waterfall pattern from the Bible sketch. Karen drew a sharp breath. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gazed at the valley. "This is it. This is where Papa wanted us to live," her voice caught. "He said someday we'd have a place where our horses could run free, where no one could. Take what was ours." Jason reached across to squeeze her hand. "We'll make it happen, girl. Whatever it takes to protect your father's dream." He studied the valley's natural defenses: steep walls, limited access, good water. A man could raise fine horses here, build a life away from those who dealt in greed and lies. They urged their mounts down the snowy slope, Gideon picking his way carefully. At the valley floor, Karen slid from the saddle and knelt to touch the grass poking through white drifts. Her father's Bible pressed against her heart, carrying all that remained of his hopes for her future. "We'll find that deed," Jason promised, watching her. "And when we do, we'll make this valley everything your father dreamed it could be." Karen nodded, wiping tears with her sleeve. For the first time since the church fire, real hope shone in her eyes. This hidden valley felt like an answer to prayer, like her father's hand reaching out to guide them even now. Night settled over the hidden valley like a thick blanket. Jason and Karen made camp against a natural rock wall, gathering dry branches for a small fire. The flames cast warm light on the stone, creating a cozy shelter from the winter wind. Gideon and the mule stood nearby, steam rising from their backs in the cold air. "Reminds me of nights on Scout," Jason said, stirring the coffee pot nestled in the coals. "Finding good ground, watching the stars come out." Karen wrapped her father's blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Papa and I camped like this when he'd go to trade horses." She smiled at the memory. "He'd always say a prayer of thanks before we slept, no matter how tired we were." Jason nodded, pouring them each a tin cup of coffee. The hot liquid warmed their hands as they watched sparks drift up toward the stars dot at first light. Jason rose quietly, leaving Karen sleeping by the banked fire. He wanted to survey the valley properly, to understand its strengths and weaknesses. Years of scouting had taught him to read land like others read books. He worked his way along the ridgelines, noting how the steep walls created natural barriers. Only 2 narrow passes offered ways in or out, good for defense, though it might make winter travel challenging. Near the center, he discovered a clear spring bubbling up through rocks, its water sweet and cold. Game trails crisscrossed the valley floor, showing deer and elk passed through regularly. The sun had climbed halfway up the eastern wall when Jason returned to camp. He found Karen kneeling in the frost-covered grass, her father's Bible open before her. Her soft voice carried on the morning air as she prayed. "Thank you, Lord, for leading us here," she whispered, "for showing us Papa's special place, for sending Jason to help when I was alone." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve as she finished. Jason waited until she rose before approaching. "Reckon we should head back," he said gently. "Marshal Cooper and the Reverend need to know what we found." They broke camp quickly, erasing signs of their fire. The return journey started well, with clear skies and firm snow under their mounts. Hooves. But by mid-afternoon, Jason's neck began to prickle. 20 years of frontier life had taught him to trust such warnings. "Keep riding steady," he murmured to Karen. "Don't look back." He watched the terrain carefully, noting fresh horse tracks crossing their trail. At the next stream crossing, he led them upstream instead of down, then circled back through a stand of pines. There, hidden by thick branches, he spotted what he feared: 2 riders following their path, faces hidden under wide hats. Even at a distance, he recognized the Caldwell's distinctive saddles. "They must have followed us from town," he told Karen in a low voice. "We need to push hard now. Ready?" Karen nodded, her face pale but determined. They set a faster pace, taking advantage of Gideon's powerful stride and the mule's sure-footedness. The winter sun sank quickly, shadows stretching across the snow. Jason chose their path carefully, using every fold in the land to break their pursuer's line of sight. Darkness had fully settled when they finally reached the cabin. Both horses and riders were exhausted, breath steaming in the cold night air. Jason quickly led the animals into the barn, while Karen lit the cabin's lamps. Inside, Jason barred the door and checked his rifle. The Caldwells know about the valley. Now, he said grimly, they'll figure there's something valuable there, something worth protecting, and they know you're the key to finding it. Karen sat at the rough table, her young face serious in the lamplight. What will we do? Keep you safe, Jason replied, pulling out his hunting knife and whetstone. The steady scraping sound filled the cabin as he worked. Whatever it takes. Karen watched him sharpen the blade, her hands folded in her lap. After a long moment, she rose and retrieved something from her saddlebag. Returning to the table, she carefully placed Gideon's bridle piece before him, the same one she'd clutched, in church as proof of her claim. I trust you, she said softly, like I trusted my father. Her voice wavered slightly. You've become like a father to me now. Jason's hands stilled on the whetstone. He stared at the bridle piece, unable to find words past a sudden tightness in his throat. But in his heart, something settled into place, a solemn vow, stronger than any he'd made since his wife died. He would protect this girl, this unexpected daughter, with everything he had. The lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the cabin wall. A man and a young girl, brought together by a horse, a hidden valley, and the kind of love that makes. A family. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Jason mounted his mule for the ride to town. The morning air bit cold and sharp, making his breath cloud before him. He'd left Karen tending to Gideon, her quiet humming following him down the trail. Main Street was already stirring when Jason arrived. He tied his mule outside the marshal's office, boots crunching on frozen mud as he climbed the wooden steps. Inside, Marshal Cooper sat at his desk, a coffee cup steaming beside him. Jason Boone, the marshal said, looking up from his papers. Wasn't expecting to see you so soon after the church fire. Jason removed his hat, settling into the chair across from Cooper's desk. Found something yesterday, Marshal. Something that might explain why the Caldwells are so set on claiming that horse. He described the hidden valley, its sheltered walls, fresh spring, and rich grazing land. As he spoke, Cooper's weathered face grew thoughtful. That'd be prime cattle country, the marshal said. Worth a fortune to whoever holds the deed. Karen's father meant it for her, Jason replied. We found his markings, showing the way there. But without those papers that burned, Cooper sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. That's the trouble, Jason. Without legal proof, I can't do much against men like the Caldwells. They've got money, influence. Half the county board sits in their pocket. And what about protecting a 14-year-old girl? Jason's voice hardened. That count for anything under the law? You know I'll do what I can, Cooper said. But my hands are tied without evidence. Best keep Karen close until we figure something out. Jason left the marshal's office with frustration burning in his gut. The ride back to the cabin seemed longer. Darker thoughts keeping pace with his mule's steady gait. The sun hung low when he finally rounded the last bend toward home. Something felt wrong before he even saw the cabin. Gideon's anxious whinnying carried through the trees. Jason spurred his mule faster. The cabin door hung crooked on broken hinges. Gideon stood tethered to the rail, his powerful body tense, head tossing. No smoke rose from the chimney. No sound of Karen singing. Karen! Jason's shout echoed off the surrounding hills. Only silence answered. He dismounted quickly, drawing his rifle. The cabin interior was a mess, table overturned, blankets scattered. Karen's father's Bible lay open on the floor, pages crumpled. Outside, boot prints marked the frozen ground, telling a story of struggle. A piece of paper fluttered from a nail driven into the broken door. Jason snatched it down, reading the crude writing by the fading light. "Come to the ranch if you want the girl." Rage and fear warred in Jason's chest as he crumpled the note in his fist. The Caldwells had taken Karen. His Karen, the girl who'd brought light back into his lonely life, who trusted him like a father. Inside the cabin, he paced between the scattered furniture, mind racing. The Caldwell Ranch sprawled across 500 acres, defended by hired guns. Charging in alone would be suicide. But waiting for help while Karen sat in their clutches. Outside, Gideon's hooves struck the frozen ground again and again, his powerful body straining against the lead rope. The horse's dark eyes fixed on Jason, reflecting the same urgency he felt in his heart. "You're right, boy," Jason murmured, running a hand down Gideon's muscled neck. "Can't wait for morning." Working quickly, he gathered what he needed: rifle, ammunition, rope, his old army knife. He'd learned during the war that moving quiet and fast could balance bad odds. The Caldwells wouldn't expect him to come at night. Jason saddled Gideon with careful hands. The great horse stood steady, as if understanding the gravity of their mission. This was the horse Karen's father had bred and trained. The horse that had brought them together. Now he would help bring her home. "Ready to show those brothers what you're made of?" Jason whispered, swinging into the saddle. Gideon's muscles bunched beneath him, power held in check. The sun slipped below the horizon as they set out, stars beginning to glitter in the darkening sky. Jason kept them to the shadows, following trails he'd learned in his scouting days. The night wind carried the promise of snow, but neither man nor horse hesitated. Somewhere ahead lay the Caldwell Ranch, and Karen. Jason's jaw tightened as Gideon's stride ate up the miles. He'd lost his wife to illness, powerless to save her. He wouldn't lose Karen too, not while he had breath in his body and a horse beneath him brave enough to carry him into danger. The moon rose behind thin clouds as they rode on, two dark figures, moving through the night toward whatever waited at journey's end. Moonlight filtered through thin clouds as Jason guided Gideon along the shadowed ridgeline. The massive black horse moved with surprising stealth, hooves barely whispering through the frost-stiffened grass. Behind them, Jason's mule waited tied safely in a thicket of scrub oak. The Caldwell Ranch spread below them like a dark kingdom. A two-story house crowned the center, lamplight burning in several windows. The barn squatted nearby, its weather boards silver in the moonlight. Jason counted 4 men patrolling with rifles, their breath clouding in the cold night air. "Easy." "Now," Jason whispered, patting Gideon's neck as they picked their way down the slope. The horse seemed to understand the need for silence. Placing each hoof with care, they skirted the edge of the corrals, keeping to the deeper shadows. Voices drifted from the house's open window, making Jason pause to listen. He recognized Jed. Caldwell's smooth drawl. "Girl's stubborn as her dead father," Jed was saying. "But she signed that paper come morning, claiming she made up the whole story about the valley. Then we'll be shut of this mess for good." Amos Caldwell's rougher voice answered with a laugh. "Might take some convincing, but she signed right enough." Jason's jaw tightened at the threat in those words. Moving faster now, he led Gideon to the barn's back wall. A small side door stood unlatched, careless guards confident in their numbers. He slipped inside, the horse following like a great shadow. Lantern light spilled from the tack room, casting weak illumination through the barn. In the third stall, he found Karen. She sat with her back against the wall, hands bound behind her, head bowed. His heart clenched at how small she looked. "Karen," he breathed. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with hope and fear. "Jason?" She. He knelt beside her, drawing his knife. "Hold still now." The ropes parted under his blade. Karen threw her arms around his neck, trembling. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I kept praying you would." "Time to go home," Jason said, helping her stand on shaky legs. But as they turned toward Gideon, boot steps crunched on hay near the barn door. "Hey, what's going on in there?" A guard's voice rang out. Jason pushed Karen behind him as a burly man with a rifle appeared in the doorway. The guard's eyes widened. Then he raised his weapon. Jason moved fast, closing the distance before the man could aim. He knocked the rifle aside with one hand while driving his other fist into the guard's stomach. The man doubled over with a grunt. A second guard rushed in. Jason met him with an uppercut that snapped the man's head back. But the first guard recovered, swinging his rifle like a club. Jason ducked, then surged up with his knife, not to kill, but to warn. The blade's flash made both men stumble back. "Run!" Jason shouted to Karen. "Get on Gideon!" She darted past the guards while Jason kept them at bay. One tried to grab her, but received Jason's boot to his knee for the effort. Both guards went down cursing as Karen swung onto Gideon's broad back. Shouts erupted from the house. A shot cracked, and splinters flew from the doorframe beside Jason's head. He spun and sprinted for Gideon, vaulting into the saddle behind Karen. As more bullets whined past, "Hold tight," he ordered, gathering the reins. Gideon needed no urging. The great horse burst from the barn like a storm wind, his powerful stride eating up the ground. More shots split the night. Karen pressed low against Gideon's neck while Jason guided them toward the tree line. Bullets sparked off rocks beside them. Behind them, horses thundered in pursuit as the Caldwell brothers led their men in chase. But Gideon proved his worth with every stride. The horse Karen's father had bred for both speed and strength pulled away from their pursuers, climbing the ridge with incredible sure-footedness despite the darkness. Soon the gunshots grew more distant, the shouting fainter. They rode hard through the night, not slowing until the eastern sky began to pale. As dawn's first gray light filtered through the pines, Jason finally reined Gideon to a walk. The horse's sides heaved, but his head remained proud, undefeated. "You did it, boy," Karen whispered, stroking his sweated neck. "You saved us both." Jason felt her shoulders shake and realized she was crying from relief, from fear finally released, from the knowledge that she was safe. He kept one arm around her waist, holding her steady as Gideon carried them deeper into the timber's shelter. The sun rose behind them, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. They were not home yet, but they were together. For now, that was enough. The first rays of sunlight pierced the morning mist as Jason and Karen approached Reverend Markham's parsonage. Their exhausted forms cast long shadows across the frost-covered ground. Gideon's hooves dragged with fatigue beneath them. The Reverend's home stood humble beside the blackened ruins of the church, its walls still bearing soot stains from the fire. At their weak knock, Markham opened the door, his eyes widening at their haggard appearance. "Good Lord," he breathed, ushering them inside. "You look half dead." Jason stumbled to a chair while Karen sank onto a worn sofa. "The Caldwells," Jason managed, his voice rough from the night ride. "They took her, tried forcing her to sign away her claim." Markham's face darkened as Jason recounted their escape. He handed them cups of steaming coffee, listening intently. When Jason finished, the preacher stood straight, his jaw set. "The whole town needs to hear this," he declared. "These men have ruled through fear too long." Despite their protests of exhaustion, Markham insisted they rest at his home until Sunday. "Truth must have its day," he said firmly. When Sunday arrived, townspeople gathered in the one-room schoolhouse, its wooden benches packed tight. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Children sat cross-legged in front, while parents and elders filled the rows behind. Reverend Markham stood before the assembled crowd, his collar crisp despite his smoke-damaged coat. "Friends," he began, "we meet here because evil men burned God's house to hide their sins. But truth, like light, cannot be forever darkened." He called Jason forward first. Standing tall despite his weariness, Jason described finding Gideon chained. In the snow, the mysterious note and Karen's recognition of her father's beloved horse. His quiet words carried to every corner as he spoke of the Bible papers and the Hidden Valley. Karen rose next, her young voice trembling at first, but growing stronger. She told of her father's murder, of carrying his Bible all these years, of the Caldwells' attempt to force her signature. Women dabbed at their eyes. Men shifted uncomfortably, shame evident on some faces for their long silence. Marshall Cooper listened from his position near the door, his weathered face grave. When Karen finished, he stepped forward. "I'll ride for the federal marshals today," he announced. This testimony must be properly recorded. Before he could continue, the schoolhouse door burst open. The Caldwell brothers strode in, their boots thundering on wooden floorboards. Yet's face wore a snake smile, while Amos glowered at the crowd. "Touching tale," Jed drawled, "but lies from start to finish. This man stole our horse and corrupted an impressionable girl with promises of land that ain't hers." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people drew back, old fears rising. Others stood their ground, glaring at the brothers. Just as the tension threatened to spark into violence, Karen stepped into the aisle. Closing her eyes, she lifted her voice in prayer. "Lord," she said clearly, "you see all hearts here today. Let your truth shine bright as morning. Help even those who hide in darkness find their way to light." Her simple words fell like gentle rain on heated ground. People bowed their heads, moved by her faith. Even some of the Caldwell's strongest supporters looked away, unable to meet her honest gaze. The brothers stood frozen for a moment, their usual confidence cracking. Then, with muttered curses, they spun and stalked out, slamming the door behind them. Jason watched them go, noting the desperate anger in their bearing. Karen's prayer had struck deeper than any weapon, but he feared the brothers would strike back all the harder for being shamed. The schoolhouse remained quiet for a long moment after their departure, Karen's prayers still echoing in every heart. 2 days passed like molasses in winter. The town held its breath, waiting. When 3 federal marshals finally rode in, their badges gleaming in the morning sun, folks gathered on porches to watch. Marshal Cooper met them at the telegraph office, his shoulders straighter than they'd been in years. The lead marshal, a granite-faced man named Hawkins, spread papers across Cooper's desk. 7 counts of land fraud in 3 counties, he announced, pointing to affidavits bearing official seals. The Caldwells have been busy. By noon, the marshals, Cooper, Jason, and a dozen deputies approached the Caldwell ranch. Dust swirled around their horses' hooves as they rode up to the main house. The brothers stood on their porch, rifles ready. "Put those down," Marshal Hawkins called out. "We have warrants for your arrest." Jed Caldwell's laugh cut sharp as broken glass. "This is our land. Our men will fight for it." But when he turned to rally his hired hands, he found empty spaces where loyal guns should have been. Those few workers still present backed away, muttering about months of missing wages. A horse's whinny split the tension. Karen appeared atop. Arise, astride Gideon. The great black horse's coat shone in the sunlight as she guided him down, his every movement showing their deep bond. She halted before the marshals, head high. "This horse proves their theft," she declared, her voice carrying across the yard. "And I have witnesses to their other crimes." Amos Caldwell raised his rifle, but Jed grabbed his arm. Looking around at the wall of lawmen and the desertion of their own men, the fight drained from both brothers' faces. "Drop your weapons, Marshal," Hawkins ordered. The rifles clattered to the porch. The marshals moved in with iron shackles, binding the brothers' wrists. As they were led to waiting wagons, townspeople began arriving, drawn by the news spreading like wildfire. Some cheered, while others stared in disbelief at the mighty Caldwells. Brought low. Reverend Markham stepped forward, holding papers. "The Valley land will be returned to its rightful owner," he announced, nodding to Karen. "The title is clear." Neighbors pressed close, offering help to build a proper home there. "We'll raise a barn come spring," one farmer promised. "Plant your first crops, too." Jason stood quiet beside Karen, one hand resting protective on her shoulder. His heart felt lighter, yet a tremor of uncertainty ran through him. Starting over meant changing everything. But watching Karen's bright smile as she thanked their newfound friends, he reckoned some changes were worth the effort. Spring painted the valley in tender greens and wildflower gold. The last patches of snow melted away beneath warm sunshine, leaving the land fresh and new. Jason and Karen worked from sunup to sundown, their hands busy with the countless tasks of making the valley their home. They mended broken fence posts, cleared winter debris, and planted neat rows in their small garden plot. Gideon roamed the sweet grass freely now, his coal-black coat gleaming like polished onyx. Sometimes he would pause in his grazing to watch them work, his intelligent eyes bright with contentment. The great horse had grown strong again, matching the valley's renewal. One crisp Sunday morning, Jason woke Karen early. "Got something to show you," he said softly. Together, they climbed the gentle slope of a hilltop overlooking the pasture. Karen gasped at what she saw below. The whole community had gathered in their Sunday best. Reverend Markham stood among them, his Bible in hand. Marshal Cooper was there too, along with what seemed like half the town. Quilts and baskets dotted the grass, and children darted about like butterflies. "They've come to bless our new beginning," Jason explained, his voice rough with emotion. Karen stepped forward, her eyes shining. Without prompting, she lifted her face to the sky and began to pray. "Dear Lord," she said clearly, "thank you for this valley and these good people. Watch over us all, and yes, even the Caldwell brothers. Show them mercy and a better path." Jason bowed his head, surprising himself as words of prayer rose from his heart for the first time in years. "Amen," he whispered, voice breaking. Afterward, the valley came alive with celebration. Children raced through tall grass, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Women spread out feasts on checkered blankets while men gathered in clusters, discussing plans for a new chapel to replace the burned one. Jason watched Karen move among their neighbors, her smile radiant. She had found what she needed most, not just land and justice, but family and belonging. Even Gideon seemed to sense the joy of the moment, lifting his head from grazing to nicker softly. Standing there in the morning light, Jason felt something he had almost forgotten, the warm presence of God's grace, washing away the loneliness that had haunted his days. Like the valley itself, his heart had come back to life. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.